Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's lovely to be with you today. I hope you're doing okay as we find our way into the springtime with one another. You know, the wildflowers here in the mountains are coming alive. And they seem to have something that they really want to communicate. You know, some invitation. To see behind the veil and really into their world. The reds, the purples, the yellows, look over here, let us show you. So I hope you've been able to spend some time outside in nature, with the flower friends and the sky and the earth and the water, the colors, the fragrances. As nature has such a way of really inviting us to slow down. you know, uh, a mingling of our minds and our nervous systems with that organic, down regulating energy of the natural world, the lunar world, the stars, that stillness, the spacious aliveness and the beauty, of course. And so, even if things are challenging for you right now, which is the reality for some of us, many of us maybe, we might be struggling with some difficult situation in our lives, or we're having a hard time in one of our relationships, or with our physical health, or we're feeling a bit down or anxious or restless or sad or worried or alone. That, even in the midst of this, we might discover a larger, more spacious context in which these experiences are moving through us, and that we're okay, that our experience is valid, that we don't need to apologize, for being an open, sensitive human being in this world. That even our shakiness, even our tenderness is, it's not an error. It's not a mistake that we need to correct or fix or cure, but it's all really quite workable. It's somehow pointing us to something within the soul that wants or needs to be known right now, to be held and embraced and illuminated, really with the warmth of our own embodied, compassionate presence. It might be something that needs to be held and transformed, not only for ourselves, actually, but for the culture, for the collective right now, or for the ancestors, and maybe even the ones who are yet to arrive here. They're on their way. And perhaps in some way, the natural world, as I look at these, beautiful mountains here, can be with us in this as an ally or guide, where we might take a few moments each day, to interrupt, we might say, to interrupt the telling of that very old ancient story that something is wrong with me, that I'm not okay, that my embodied vulnerability and sensitivity is some error that I need to cure or fix or even transcend by way of some spiritual process. That I can slow down and meet my immediate embodied experience in the spirit of true friendship, which for many of us is not so easy, is it? To be a real friend to ourselves, to turn toward those vulnerable and sensitive parts of myself and to enter into a relationship with them, and really listen to what it is that they have to say, to travel underneath that well-worn narrative that we've inherited from family or culture or from the collective, and into that alive, embodied, energetic reality of what it means to be an open, sensitive human being, and the workability of that, even the dignity of that, the grace of that, the possibility of really being with myself and my experience in a new way, to be a lover of reality and the magic in that so many of us have lost contact with in our modern world, especially these days, when there's that slow drip of cortisol, of adrenaline that seems to be coming out of the collective, almost all the time these days. Of course, that's going to affect us. Where that aliveness, that meaning, that contentment, that beauty, that wild joy isn't so much dependent on shifting everything around for all of the inner and outer circumstances to perfectly align, but that there's something here, some type of joy and aliveness that isn't caused. It's causeless. It's already and always here, actually, and not dependent on what feelings or thoughts happen to be arising and passing. That we can turn toward ourselves, toward our embodied vulnerability, toward that sensitivity or that shakiness or that tenderness, and discover a freedom, a joy that is causeless, a heart that is open to life, and a knowing, a growing sense of trust and of confidence in our capacity to really be here and to really participate in the full spectrum nature of what it means to be an open, sensitive human being on the planet right now. And to discover a place of inner refuge and sanctuary that's always already here. It's not something we have to create or produce or to earn or to achieve, because it's actually our very nature as it is. A basic sense of goodness, spaciousness, aliveness, warmth. It's already here. We don't have to create it. We don't have to complete some mythical spiritual journey first or get tangled up in some unending project of self-improvement, which, as many of us know, can be so exhausting, really. And speaking with people over these last weeks and months, this year in my therapy practice and in the groups that I'm working with, many people have shared with me a real unsettled sort of feeling that they're experiencing, more than I can remember in quite some time. A certain sort of shakiness and uncertainty out there in the world, in the collective, that of course becomes filtered down, mirrored, felt, and incarnated in our own individual bodies, deep in psyche and soma, is what we might describe as a loss of center or a loss of ground. And the reality is that for many of us, that we find ourselves right in the middle of a death rebirth cycle, which is in some sense where the collective is as well, isn't it? Where there has been a certain sort of death, the dying away of an old dream, the dream of me and my life and how it was all going to turn out, how it was all supposed to turn out. The person who was supposed to always be by my side. Remember them. The consistent meaning I would find in my work or in what I liked to do, who I like to spend time with, my friendships, how I've found purpose in the way I'm spending my time. A body that was never supposed to ache or to fall apart. A psyche that was never supposed to feel anxious or depressed or restless or bored or scared. A path that was just relatively clear and known and had a real direction to it. A culture, a society, a world that I once thought or believed or wanted to believe was a true holding environment for myself and for all of life. For many of us, this dream has been taken to dust. Or to use an alchemical word, it's been putrefied or liquefied. And we're left here in the shimmering unknown of it all, in between the way things were and what it is that's emerging now, which isn't yet clear. It's not yet known. We're in the middle, and in between period of liminality and unknowing. It's like we're being asked to empty out. Or not necessarily asked, are we? But we're being emptied out by life, by God, by the beloved, by the self, so that something new can be born and can emerge from the ashes. And no, this isn't easy, is it? It can ache. It can burn. There's a way that we can feel so exposed, naked, unprotected, unguarded, vulnerable. But there's also a certain sort of aliveness in that, if we can really give ourselves to it, if we can stay embodied, incarnated with it as the chaos unfolds. Easier said than done, of course, but that's the invitation. How do we find that doorway, that portal? How do we peer behind or beyond the matrix, and walk through? I mean, we live in a world that in so many ways has lost contact with the capacity to grieve, with the purifying sort of holiness of that, the wholeness of that, to allow our hearts to break without immediately having to mend them. And we can ask our hearts, is that really the deepest longing of a broken heart to actually be quickly mended? Or is it something else? You'll have to check that out and let me know. But that staying embodied to the ways that conscious shattering can open us, as we turn toward the unlived within us, everything that remains unilluminated and unlived, to the unlived life. We When we do that, we simultaneously are turning toward the ancestors and toward the earth herself, to every single life form who has been taken apart and reassembled by the inside out. And of course, it's understandable to do whatever we can to avoid this inevitable process, as it burns and aches and just washes away the known. It really is understandable. It's so very human. No shame, no apology, no blame. But the disowning and the disavowing of the figures of grief, the figures within us, the pieces of soul who are carrying that grief on our behalf, to disown those does come with real consequences, at least in my experience. A lost soul and a disconnection with the inherent sacredness of this place. Because in the death rebirth cycle, there are two essential components, right? There's death, which we're referring to here alchemically or metaphorically, the dissolving of the known. And on the other hand, rebirth, renewal, rejuvenation. And it's really quite understandable that it's the second aspect of the cycle that maybe we're most interested in. I want that one, the rebirth one. The dissolution or the dying away aspect of the path of awakening, of healing, of transformation, of embodied individuation, which by its very nature must, involve dissolution. It just isn't as easy or natural to embrace or to see it as equally sacred, equally holy, an equal manifestation of love, or the beloved as it incarnates or embodies here to seed this world with its qualities, which it does by way of our own hearts, our own bodies, our imaginations, our feelings. It's that Kali aspect of love. For those of you familiar with Hindu mythology or an energy like Vajrakilaya in the Tibetan tradition, or Mercurius in alchemy, or the hidden side of God or the divine, or the kenotic emptying out of the early Christian mystics that they spoke of, or St. John's dark night of the senses or of the soul. And this darker aspect of the transpersonal self plays a vital role in our individuation and healing. And being in conscious relationship, with this dimension of psyche is indispensable on the path. Though it sure isn't easy to stay with, is it? Perhaps we need some help to do that. Some extra grace, some extra mercy. We just can't always do it on our own. I mean, it can be supportive, if not necessary at times, to tend to all of this, to this restructuring alongside an empathic other, whether a therapist, a mentor, a teacher, a friend, ideally something with some experience of this inner terrain. through what we call a joined or a shared window of tolerance. You can hold and transmute emotions and images, feelings that on your own would otherwise be overwhelming or just too shadowy, just too out of reach. At times we need a lamp in the darkness in order to see. We just weren't meant to always walk the path alone. That's just not the sort of nervous system that we've been crafted with. Not in this star, anyway. No need to apologize for that, for being an open, sensitive, relational human being who's wired to love and to be loved, to connect. So there's the death aspect of the archetypal cycle, and also that long awaited dawning, of rebirth, the springtime of the soul, where we're offered vision and a new pathway into a new way of being. It's where a doorway or a portal begins to swing open after being closed for a certain period of time. And I am, hearing from some of you that perhaps that in your dreams or in your time out in nature and your inquiry, your prayer, your meditation, your shamanic journeying, whatever it is you're up to out there. But there's a sense that that doorway is beginning to swing open, or at least it's appearing. It's there, the door is there. A lot happening in the dream world, it seems, these days. But, in my experience, just personally really tending to my own pain, abandonment, grief, loss, betrayal, and also in my clinical work, it's our willingness and our capacity to feel and to grieve that really bridges death and rebirth. Meaning, at least from one perspective anyway, there is no lasting, embodied, visionary renewal without passing through the portal of grief, at least temporarily, which requires us to slow down, to go into the earth and to go onto the ground, and to honor, to really honor all that we've lost, and how the path of awakening, the path of healing, the path of individuation isn't only about what I'm going to get, what I'm going to acquire from the path, but in large part, perhaps about what it is that will be taken away, that will be emptied out. I mean, that's the way that the cup is able to be emptied, so that our perception can be cleansed, so that our heart can be polished. And of course, it is, in the end, it is love that is the cleanser, the washer, and the polisher of that. But, in this sense, we might say that grief, embodiment to grief, is the forgotten portal. And in, my experience, this connection and this exploration is just, it's often left out, of a lot of our contemporary psychotherapies and spiritualities. Not always, but often, which many of which remain riveted to the upward, to the transcendent, to the solar currents, or else to the quick removal of symptoms, which it turns out those symptoms can and often do contain important pieces of soul that need to be tended, that need to be held, that need to be illuminated, perhaps before they're healed. But we have to go into the mud, into the earth, and tend to those more lunar currents as well, for the new and the creative to take birth and to incarnate here through our bodies, through our hearts, through our imagination. We provide a place within us for the moon and for her grace also to become ensouled. And that can ache and it can burn, and we can long for relief, of course. But we might come to discover that that longing too is a certain sort of doorway. But these, times that we're living in, it's as if a great cosmic rug has been pulled out from underneath us, in ways that we're not always conscious of. It's just sort of there, that rug pulling going on in the background, that slow drip of cortisol, of adrenaline, that felt sense that things just aren't okay, that I'm not okay. We might notice ourselves breathing from high up in our chest, or our postures curled over, or we're wanting to sort of get into the fetal position and fall down onto the ground in the stress of it all. So understandably the case. And there's a lot of talk these days about the topic of regulation and the need to feel regulated, resourced, safe. And these things are really important. They're really important. And it's an act of intelligence and self-compassion, to have a list of actions that you as an individual can take in a particular moment, that for you, which may be different from your spouse or your kids or your therapist or your coworkers, but that for you brings a felt sense of safety, of ground, of reconnection. Very simple things that engage your five senses and that have a way of keeping you established in the here and now, that you can evoke in a moment when you recognize that you've fallen out of center. And so just in addition to that, again, so important, and a lot of people are speaking about that right now, but in addition to that, not instead of regulation, but just another way to sort of enter into the experiment, as another one of the burners on the alchemical stove, is to tend to and to give ourselves at times the permission to also be, fully human, with open, sensitive nervous systems, with hearts that sometimes are going to break, and with bodies that are sometimes going to ache and burn and long for connection, for communion, for union, without seeing that as something that needs to be cured or fixed or transformed or managed or even regulated. I mean, the truth is, at least in my experience, and please don't take my word for it, we're not always going to be able to feel grounded or regulated all the time. It's just not the reality of the kind of nervous system that we have here. And I think one thing that I've come to experience time and time again over these last 35 years or so on this journey is that the spiritual path, the healing path, isn't always going to feel safe at a feeling level. That doesn't mean it isn't safe. but it's not always going to feel safe. We just can't ask that of the spiritual path, of the healing path. It just wasn't designed for that. I mean, how could it be? To go back into psyche and to soma and to shadow and to the psychic underworld, into the somatic unconscious, and to illuminate and to untangle those wounds around love, to unveil our true identity and essence. We're going to have to come face to face with all of that which has remained unilluminated and unlived within us. And by its very nature, that's likely going to just feel pretty shaky, as if we're being tenderized by life, by the beloved, by the ally, by the great mystery. Contact with the numinous, with the numinosum, is not always going to feel safe at a feeling level. And one thing that can happen with those of us, who are interested in things like experiential forms of psychotherapy and spirituality or meditation, shamanic journeying, plant medicine, whatever that way of kneeling and kissing the ground looks like for us, to quote Rumi, is that in the face of this tenderizing or this felt sense of groundlessness, nakedness, we often arrive at an unconscious conclusion. It's just there waiting for us, that if in any particular moment, if I'm not feeling fully regulated or safe, or if I'm a bit outside my window of tolerance, that there's something wrong with me, or that I'm not okay, or that I've failed, or that I've been forsaken by life, by God, by goddess. And then, of course, in response, we scramble and we spin to just quickly and urgently get back into a state of regulation, of calm, of balance, of certainty. And it can have a real survival level sense to it. And just to say again, just so it's clear, that it's so very human, so very understandable. No shame, no blame, no judgment, no need to apologize for that. It's an essential way that we take care of ourselves. As always, the invitation is more onto just the conscious awareness, more subtle seeing, more sensitivity in body and feeling, a more subtler type of compassion, of kindness, of a perception of what's going on. And, one thing that I've noticed is this deeply rooted organization and conclusion that I'm supposed to feel regulated, grounded, balanced all the time. Paradoxically, actually has a way of increasing sympathetic activation and that survival level sort of panic and anxiety that can go with that. As well as, of course, the corresponding shame and judgment and self-attack that also goes along with that. Ironically, perhaps it's not all that safe to go along with the unexamined belief that I'm supposed to feel safe all the time. Nor is it kind, actually, because it's not in line with reality. And so I think part of what we're invited into here is a new relationship with the shakiness, with the chaos, with the tenderization, with the groundlessness, with the dysregulation. Not at a conceptual level, as some new belief that we can take on. We have enough of those. But in an embodied experiential way. And to open to the possibility that these difficult and challenging experiences are not evidence that something is wrong with us, that we've yet again done life wrong, or that we're not okay, that these experiences aren't obstacles to the path, but that they are the very path itself, shimmering, radiant manifestations of the path itself. Maybe even as the activity, to begin to see them as the activity of the allies of wholeness and integration. And just to emphasize once more, it's vital, it's essential to be able for each of us to access a basic requisite amount of safety and regulation in our bodies and our nervous systems, 100%, in order to open to the self, to the numinous, to the vast and mysterious inner center that is always holding and containing us. I'm not speaking against that at all. I hope that's clear. At times, it's absolutely the most intelligent and also the kindest action to take, and to really prioritize and to privilege that returning into a felt sense of safety. And in addition to that, not instead of it, but at other times, at least in my experience, it's also the activity of a certain kind of wisdom and a certain kind of compassion to set aside temporarily that demand or requirement that I always feel safe and regulated, and instead to discover an already always existing field of containment that is able to hold the entirety of our experience, which would include moments of disconnection, moments of not feeling safe, moments of that felt sense of groundlessness and uncertainty, and even moments when it can feel as if things are falling apart or that we're falling apart. And to open to that experiential discovery that there may be something here to contain those fragments, those pieces of soul, even in their fragmented form, without needing to reassemble them prematurely. Not to mention the containment and the holding of the grief and the sadness, the fear, the shame, the apathy, and the rage that may be alive within us, which also has its own intelligence and wisdom. These experiences, especially in times such as that we're living in now, are valid and understandable. They're coherent and they make sense. And they too need to be felt, to be verbalized, to be made sense of, to be integrated. Because if they're not, we're going to act them out unconsciously in ways that tend to cause additional suffering for ourselves, for others, for our planet. And from this deep layer of center, capital C, these experiences are not in need of being transformed or even healed, because they're not unwhole. Your grief is not unwhole. Your heart is not unwhole, even your broken heart. Your rage at injustice is not unwhole. And I find it to be so important right now, so vital. And if we disown or we abandon these feelings and these sensations, as well as the internal figures who have been carrying them for years, decades, generations on our behalf, they will become sequestered into the shadow and frozen and crystallized into our muscles, into our cell tissue, into our throats, into our bellies, into our faces, into our legs. And from there, again, we have no other option than to unconsciously act all of that out. You know, I mean, in the end, it's the activity of a more, oh, we could call it a wild or an untamed or an undomesticated or a wrathful compassion, to grant ourselves the permission at times, not all the time, at times to not always feel regulated, safe, grounded, clear, and to turn toward that, not as mistake, not as some cosmic error that needs to be fixed, cured, transformed, transcended, but as an ally of data and information coming from deep within the soul, deep within the soma. And that, while completely valid and important, we might come to realize that perhaps that regulation isn't the end goal of this life, to feel regulated and safe all the time. That in fact, actually, in order to realize, to embody, to incarnate the deep transformative healing and self-realization that so many of us are longing for, it's actually going to require that we step into the unknown around this, and we set aside that demand, at least temporarily, and replace it with a certain sort of curiosity, trust, devotion, and to discover a centering within us which has never and could never itself be dysregulated. It's that vast, mysterious centering that is always holding and containing us, even in moments when the rug has been pulled out from underneath. And yes, there does have to be a requisite sort of baseline amount of safety and resource. It's not just a psychic or a neurophysiological free-for-all. That's definitely not what I'm talking about, especially if we have any history of relational or traumatic wounding, traumatic or post-traumatic stress, unresolved traumatic organization. It's essential, intelligent, compassionate, merciful, to emphasize a felt sense of safety, privileging that, and not going ahead blindly with what we might call more uncovering work, or dropping into more wide open, unguarded, naked territory. That would neither be effective nor would it be kind. But if we do have that capacity, some capacity, not perfect all the time, but in a particular moment, if we have that capacity, we have to be honest with ourselves. That capacity to tolerate and to stay with that more anxious, shaky, fragmenting, more groundless types of energies, of images, of bodily sensations. Then we could experiment with this if we're drawn. And so I thought we'd end today with a short practice that we could do together that may invite us into some of this territory. And before we do that practice, I wanted to let you know that my spirituality and healing group and community is going to be opening next week, a new quarterly membership where you can join us for just a few months. And I continue to hear from some of you that it's just not easy to find an inner work group or a healing community or a therapist that you feel aligned with. that can really understand you, that can be with you, that has experience in really making this journey. Not to mention the costs, of course, of something like longer term therapy or counseling or mentorship or coaching. Especially a group that really honors the importance of psychological work on the spiritual path, tending to our early wounding around love. A group that includes things like shadow work and somatic sensitivity, as well as, the deeper layers of the unfolding of the transpersonal self experiences, such as communion, union, non-dual unity consciousness, and things like that. So, I mean, if that's something that you might be interested in or curious about, you could take a look at the group's homepage, and maybe we could drop that link in here into the chat. And after you explore that, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We can drop that support email address in here as well. And the new quarter will get started officially on next Thursday, which is May 1st. And so as we come to the end of our time here together today, let's, I do want to share this short practice with you that you might experiment with, and in those moments when you feel off center or worried or anxious or shaky or scared. And it's also helpful to do the practice even when you're not feeling these things, as a way just to establish a deeper sort of neural groove of embodied attunement, of returning to a sense of compassionate, spacious presence. So you can use it in either of those situations. And I found that short moments frequently throughout the day, tend to be more effective for most of us than trying to schedule some long period of practice. So even something like 2 to 3 minutes a few times a day can really have a profound impact over time. And so I'll walk you through the practice here. And then once you try it, a few times on your own, you may discover that you can really cycle through it in just a minute or two when you have a few extra minutes in between meetings, on the train, out on your walk, whatever it is. Okay, so you could just find a comfortable way to sit, where you can relax as deeply as possible, and while also at the same time just remaining as awake and as aware as you can. And if you're able to have your feet flat on the floor, that can be supportive. And just allowing yourself to fully arrive into this moment, really inviting your energy and your attention to shift out of all of the mental activity, all of the busyness of the day, and really just to come down into your body, through your heart and your belly. And it's as if your entire body were being filled drop by drop by drop with a soft, warm, yellow golden light, the light of a curious, compassionate essence, the light of consciousness. And just bringing your awareness into your belly, and just noticing how your belly rises and falls with your natural breathing. Almost as if you were attuning to the heartbeat of the earth herself. And just, if you're able to just actually see if you can soften your belly, as we often hold so much unlived, unmetabolized grief and other feeling experience in our bellies, which is understandable. With your energy and your awareness just continuing to descend and coming to rest in the soles of your feet, in the very center of your feet, as they connect you with a felt sense of anchoring and of ground. You might imagine roots, a root system growing out of the bottom of each of your feet and extending down into the muddy earth, into the soil, into the mud, into the oceans and the rivers, as the earth holds and nourishes you with her beingness, her body, fully containing you in this moment. And from this place of embodied, open, receptive presence, to just imagine yourself in the very center of a circle that has an infinite circumference, just enclosed within an inner courtyard or a garden, with each and every aspect of your life revolving around the center, pointing inward back toward that alive, magnetic core. And within the circle, at a point of light, within the very interior with you, you may notice a guide or an inner ally appearing as a figure or a color or a sound or an image or just a felt sense of centering, an intuitive knowing, a vast field of containment. And then this inner center was never and could never be tainted by anything that has happened to you. Relational trauma, emotional wounding, unrepaired circuitries, broken links of attachment, soul level betrayal and hurt, worry, fear, the effects of a borderline or narcissistic early environment. It's simply a vast open field of mercy and permission in which the entirety of your life is able to be contained and held. And you can turn to this inner center, which at times may personify itself as an ally or a guide, as a being in nature, or as an animal friend, or as a tree, or the moon, or just a feeling of benevolence, of love. In times when you feel that sense of worry, or uncertainty, or groundlessness, or overwhelm, or stress, or you're shaky, anxious, unsettled, confused. And in this, you may discover that even these most unwanted, confusing, uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, sensations in your body are actually made of wisdom. Communications from the center and the attempt at self-healing, self-realization, guiding you back into that dynamic ground, that wholeness that is unchanging, even in moments of shakiness and in times when things are falling apart. And you can familiarize yourself with this vast opening, learning to recognize and even rest within it, to rest within the chaos in ways that the conceptual mind isn't always able to understand. There's a holding available even within the darkness itself. It's a more lunar benevolence, a containment there that can nourish you in unexpected ways, a natural ordering within the self where each emotion, feeling, sensation, image somehow has a purposive quality to it, a way that the self is reaching out to you to draw you nearer to itself, where each experience and aspect of your life is circulating and orbiting around the center and pointing back towards it. And this is the mandala principle, the mandala of wholeness and our primordially pure, clear light nature. And we'll just rest now for a few moments within the felt aliveness of the circle in the center, held and contained in something vast yet not fully known, but possessing those qualities of benevolence and warmth and complete openness, along with an emerging trust and confidence that you're always being held. We'll just rest here for a few moments together. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for your time and attention, for sharing a bit of your heart and your world with me. I'd love to see you inside the community, and if you feel drawn to make a deeper dive with me and with a kind-hearted group of friends and fellow travelers, into the nature of an alive, embodied spirituality, one that includes psychological and psychotherapeutic work, and that's sensitive to trauma and other early forms of wounding, and that's deeply attuned really to our emotional and our relational lives, and is oriented in discovering and embodying a spiritual path that is your own, that is really unique to you and to your individual soul print. So again, thank you, and please take care of yourself. And we can just take a moment and say hello and goodbye to one another. And I look forward to staying in touch, in one way or another over these weeks and months to come. Okay, take care. Lots of love to you.